Welcome, Willamette family and friends, to this interview with Roger and Bonnie Hull. We're sitting here in the beautiful Carl Hall Gallery in the Halliford Museum of Art, and we're here today to talk about two exhibitions that are in the museum right now. The first is called The Promise of Paint, and the second is Memory as Myth, which features art by Bonnie Hull. Roger was the curator and designer of the Clifford Gleason exhibit, and of course, Bonnie is the artist for the Bonnie Hull exhibit. So I'm really thrilled to be here talking with both of you today.
Oh, thank you for having us.
It has been one of my great pleasures to get to know both of you since I arrived at Willamette, and you are both fixtures in Willamette's art world and art history world. I'd love, Roger, for you to just start by introducing the museum to the people who are watching. When did the Halliford open? How does it contribute to the Willamette community and also to Salem?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting us to participate in this program. Our pleasure to do so, our privilege. This happens to be, this month, October 2020, happens to be the 22nd anniversary of the founding, of the opening of the Halliford Museum of Art. October of 1998 is when it opened. I like to take credit for having envisioned and helped plan the Halliford Museum. I thought it would be nice to have a museum at Willamette. Nice traditional liberal arts college fixture to have a museum. And the forces were such in the 90s that it came about rather quickly. Thanks in part to large donations by Halliford, Mary Beth Collins, and others. This is a renovated telephone company office building. Everyone said it would never work as a museum because the ceilings are too low, but we're sitting in a space where the ceiling is very high because we took out part of the ceiling. So we are in the Atrium Gallery. This is actually the Melvin Henderson Rubio Gallery.
Thank you. The Carl Hall Gallery is behind you.
Yes, it's right through that door. That one named for the illustrious art professor Carl Hall, who taught here for years. This one named for the illustrious alum, Melvin Henderson Rubio, who was very much part of the funding of the museum when it opened. So the museum is positioned on a corner of the campus so that it is a Salem community museum, as well as a museum for the faculty and students of Willamette. And to a degree, the exhibitions are geared to the curriculum in an attempt to link what we show here to what's being taught, not only in art and art history, but other subject fields as well. Of course, we're always working to strengthen that link between the curriculum and the museum. We're particularly known for our emphasis on, well, we have several emphases, but particularly known for our emphasis on Pacific Northwest art. And I think that fact helps make this recent merger with the Pacific Northwest College of Art rather interestingly relevant. We have this museum that has featured quite a few artists who taught or were students or were both at PNCA over the decades. So I, for one, am very happy with that merger. It is a museum that caters to the community and to the state beyond Salem. Halliford Museum of Art is very much of interest to Portland artists who come down to Salem to see what we have on. And we're always trying to build our outreach and our attendance. And we have a very capable director, John Olbrantz, who's been here since the museum opened and who has worked hard to make the museum a success, which he has managed to do.
It's been wonderful that the museum has actually reopened for even during COVID, that people can come and visit the galleries, but today is the day when it's usually closed, Mondays.
Yes.
So we're taking advantage of that for these interviews today, but it is wonderful that the galleries are open 4 days a week right now, I think, or 5.
5, yes, Tuesday through Saturday.
Great.
It was closed down for 5 or 6 months when the Carl Hall Gallery, which is our permanent collection gallery, was of Northwest Art, was totally hung with new, different work from the collection. But it was a real relief to us and to people we know in town that the museum opened when school started up again.
Yeah. Well, these two exhibits are beautifully hung, and I had the pleasure of touring them myself on Friday of last week. They're gorgeous and very, very interesting, and interesting together as well. Would you talk a little bit about how these exhibits came about and how it happened that they're timed at the same time?
Well, John Olbrandt's the director, and I have been talking for some years about a Clifford Gleason show and also a Bonnie Hull show. And it was always in mind that we would do these when the exhibition schedule permitted. But it was unclear just when these would occur. There was a cancellation of a show that had been planned about a year ago. And so suddenly, Clifford Gleason was put on the calendar, and I had to get to work to prepare that show and write a monograph to go with the exhibition.
Oh, we should have a copy.
And we should have a copy of that
I have
book.
one right here.
So there's the exhibition plus the monograph. And then it just happened that the two galleries upstairs were open for Bonnie's show at the same time. These were intended to be summer shows, but no sooner were they scheduled as that when the museum shut down and they became autumn shows. So we're quite pleased that they're on together for various reasons. It makes it the Bonnie Hull and Roger Hull moment at the Valley Forge Museum of Art, and it occurs on the occasion of our 50th year in Salem. We have been in Salem 50 years.
That's wonderful.
So,
Unbelievable.
and Bonnie has a history of showing at Willamette, and she could just tell you about that quickly.
Yes.
The name, I will say that the exhibition title of my show is Memories Myth. And when COVID struck and the museum shut down in May, I thought, oh, that was a perfect title. Maybe this is a myth. So it's been very gratifying to have the show actually go up and to go up in combination with Clifford Gleason. We were aced out of our last wonderful moment of giving talks and appearing in the gallery at the opening because, of course, there are no openings anymore, but that's okay. This is the moment for that.
So Bonnie did show at Willamette not quite 50 years ago when Robert Hess, the former sculpture professor here, organized or invited Bonnie to have a show.
And that was in 1976.
So she has a history of showing her work at Willamette.
At Willamette. And I have to just comment, Bonnie, because I love that you're doing it, your journal, your drawing.
I hope it's okay.
Talking, of course it's okay. I love this about you. And of course, as we talk later about your exhibit, part of the exhibit is some of your journals. So it's perfectly fitting and wonderful that you're drawing.
Well, I draw everywhere, and there are a certain number of alums who, over the years, have come to Italy with us, and they can, I'm sure, vouch for the fact that I always have a drawing book and I'm always drawing, and keeps me very quiet. I think it's good, yeah. So my first show, Robert Hess invited me to show in 1976, my first solo show, which has some really rather remarkable drawings in it that caused quite a stir. And this show has been a little bit calmer in the overall look of it, I think, but it's been very, very nice and very gratifying to have it up there, right up there.
Right up there.
So, yeah, right up there.
Great. Well, let's dive in a little bit to Clifford Gleason and The Promise of Paint. And Clifford, of course, was here in Salem. He's actually one of our own. But will you tell us a little bit about Clifford and put him in time?
Yes, Clifford Gleason was born in 1913 and died in 1978, so he was 65 only when he died. He was born in Portland to the Goss family. His original name was Carl Goss, G-O-S-S, about whom little information survives that I was able to find. But in his infancy, he was adopted by the Gleasons, Leon and Wilhelmina Gleason of Salem. And he was raised in Salem. His parents owned the Gleason Glove Factory, and it said that as a little boy, Gleason scribbled drawings on the walls of the factory. The factory was right over here on land Willamette owns, by the way, at 14th and Oak Streets. And he took that as evidence that his family took that as evidence that he showed skill as an artist, even before he was one.
Right.
He attended Salem schools. He did very well in art classes in junior high and high school. He didn't do very well in any other courses and didn't graduate from high school, though I'm told only 29% of high school students did graduate in the 1920s from American schools, so he wasn't in the minority necessarily in not graduating. He had a very stimulating high school art teacher by the name of Ruth Broughty, who had studied modern art, liked modern art, made it herself, I guess, had her classroom at Salem High School lined with posters of Matisse and Picasso and the moderns of that era. We're talking late 20s, early 30s. That was quite radical art for then. Gleason took an immediate interest in it. She saw his imminent emerging talent. She encouraged him, and he really thought of her as a major factor in his becoming an artist. In the late 30s, during the Depression, during the WPA, the Salem Federal Arts Center opened in downtown Salem in the old Salem High School on the site of what now is Macy's department store. Gleason enrolled in classes there and in particular studied advanced painting with Louis Bunce. Now, Louis Bunce was a major Oregon modern painter, not that much older than Clifford, but had been in New York. He was from out here, but he'd been in New York and attended the opening exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art in 1929 and was quite the worldly guy who happened to be teaching in Salem. And that became a very important step in Gleason's evolution as an artist. In Louis Bunce's class, he designed a big mural, very surrealistic and kind of strangely hallucinogenic mural of Alice in Wonderland for the Bush Elementary School library. And that really stands as Gleason's first major work, and it survives. Bonnie and I worked with others to save the mural when Bush School was torn down in 2005, and it was conserved and reinstalled up at North Salem High School. The new Bush School administrators didn't want it because they thought it was too terrifying for young children, so it had to go off to high school, which is where it is now.
It's stunning, really,
Yeah,
and pretty impressive when you think about how old he was and how new this style of painting was, not just to him, but to the world.
Yeah, of all WPA paintings that I know about in Oregon or beyond, it is really one of the more radically modern, because an awful lot of WPA art was kind of American scene painting, farmsteads and apple trees and people picnicking and that.
Yes, to
wonderful
look at
subjects, but not this.
Right, you would never look at that and say it's a WPA painting. So many others are easily identifiable by that style of the time. Yeah, it's really interesting. And didn't Louis Bunce also show Clifford Gleason in a gallery that he owned as well?
Yes, so later on, Louis Bunce and his wife Ida in Portland opened the Karuba Gallery, which was the first gallery in the state really to aggressively feature modern art, cutting edge, new art. That opened in 1949 and lasted through the mid-50s, and it was a place where if you were an emerging modern artist in Oregon, you really wanted to show. And the Bunces showed Gleason's drawings there in 1950, I guess. It was something in that. So that was early on in Gleason's exhibition successes. He showed a lot in Portland, he showed a lot in Salem, sometimes in Seattle, sometimes in San Francisco, but basically he's got a pretty strong Oregon footprint.
He spent a brief period of time in California?
After the Federal Arts Center experience, he, with Louis Bunce's support, was admitted to the Museum Art School, forerunner of the Pacific Northwest College of Art,
right,
which is now part of Willamette. And studied there on scholarship for 2 years, and then went down to California to room with his longtime Salem friend, Maurice Hudkins, who had grown up in Salem just as Clifford had. They were school chums. But Maurice had moved to California, so Clifford went down there to join him. But they both came back to Salem, and then thereafter, Clifford was in Salem pretty much until the mid-'60s, when he was more in Portland than Salem.
I'm remembering a quote, and now I thought I had written it down, but I lived in LA for 4 years as well. And didn't he say something about how he couldn't paint with the palm trees and all the sun, that he needed something more wet and green? Or there was something about him really connecting to Oregon and the landscape here as opposed to Southern California.
Yeah, there's a very nice interview that was recorded just before Clifford died, and it's on file at the Oregon Historical Society. And that transcript of that interview, I relied on fairly heavily on doing my research. But in there, he says he liked Southern California, and he did lots and lots and lots of drawing down there. But he just didn't find it a place where he could really sink into painting. It was too warm, it was too sunny, there were all these palm trees. He likes rain and greenery and so forth. And he does a lot of talking about nature. Looking at his work as a whole, you might not guess that, but he talked a lot about going to the Oregon coast, loving the tide pools. He often titled his paintings after nature. Garden, the word garden comes up, landscape comes up, tidal pools comes up, winter, seasonal references, even though the paintings are quite abstract.
Well, I can completely identify with that feeling about Southern California.
You felt that?
It's beautiful, but I wanted green and rain and trees and shade and things like that as well. Well, let's dive in a little bit to some of these images that we're going to talk about. And the first one is actually a photo of Clifford Gleason himself doing one of his paintings.
Yes, there's Clifford. It's in the 1960s. He was in Salem at that point. He had various apartments around town, and often he would have a studio in the basement of the place, and that's where this is. I don't exactly know the exact location, but that's very much Clifford there. George Johansen, the artist, knew Clifford and described him as the thinnest person, a bundle of nerve endings with a person wrapped around them, around the nerve endings. And I guess that photo kind of suggests that. He's a very tall, skinny guy.
And how about the first image here of the still life with spools, I believe?
Yeah, still life with spools. That's an early major work by Gleason. The Hallie Ford Museum of Art owns it, I'm happy to say. About 1939 is the date of it. It opens our show. The show's laid out chronologically. We start with the early work. I think that one shows very much his interest in a knowledge of European modern art of the period. Has a strong affinity with works by such artists as Georges Braque and Picasso in his later, more decorative cubist phases. Very skillfully done and very much in conversation with great confidence with European modernism of the time. Again, we're talking about a young guy in Salem. He's associated with the Federal Art Center when he does this, being quite aware of art movements far beyond the capital city of Salem. And from then on, Salem art collectors, of which there were a number actually, and art patrons, really began to look at Gleason with great interest and see him as a kind of cultural treasure right here in Salem. And they supported him by purchasing his work and showing his art in their homes. And he went to Paris in 1951 for 3 months to study with Leger. Some of the local patrons chipped in money to help him take that trip. He was very much supported.
It's easy for us to forget how much harder it was to be in relationship with the art and artists that were far away.
Yes.
At this time. Traveling across the country was not something people did with frequency. Traveling to Europe, even less so. There was no internet. So the reproduction of pieces by other artists was often in black and white in a newspaper. So it's pretty remarkable that here in Salem, he was as exposed as he was to all that was going on. I thought about this painting too, after you and I talked about it last week. The spools are sort of unusual, but then it was the glove factory. Maybe that's the connection to the fabric and the spools.
That's what I wondered and mentioned in the monograph, the possibility that between that and the Thomas K. Woolen Mill, which was just down the street from the glove factory, the spools might have been local artifacts that.
They were just lying around his house.
Yeah,
even.
yeah.
That's great. So tell me about this next image.
Let's see. That's called Bellcrest Still Life. That was done later. This is toward 1947 or so. So I put it next in the sequence just to confirm that still life, which is what the subject of the spools painting is, was a common theme for him in the early work. A lot of still lifes and figures, costumed figures. Bellcrest refers to the cemetery in South Salem. In the 1930s, the Gleasons lost their glove factory in the Depression. And Leon, the father, became the superintendent of Bellcrest Memorial Gardens, the cemetery. And the Gleasons lived in a house on the property. And in that period, Gleason, still living with them, did a lot of colorful still life paintings, sort of still life / landscape, really. I think this one has sort of landscape elements in it as well. Sort of inspired, broadly speaking, by the environment and the scene down there, forms and buildings. But anyway, the general point is that still life, quite fauvist and abstracted and very colorful, what was of interest to him.
Yes, and you mentioned, and maybe you'll talk about this with later pieces, but his interest in the circus. And I look at this color scheme and it's so bright, and it is reminiscent of that to me as well.
And the next one that we have in the sequence is a specific circus reference, I guess, female clown with circus dummy. I have a hunch Maurice Hudkins, who owned that painting, gave it that title, but that's the title that comes down, and we're using it. 1940s, probably about the same time as Bellcrest Still Life. Maurice Hudkins, his Salem friend, and Clifford loved the circus. The circus used to come to Salem. Whenever it did, they would go. So there are quite a few paintings and many, many, many drawings of circus-type figures, costumed figures, acrobats. There was something about human beings dressed up as something special in costume, in other words, that Gleason was attracted to. So his early work tends to be a lot of still life painting on the one hand, or costumed figures on the other.
Not unlike other modern painters being focused on performers or ballerinas or other people. Lots of color and drama and action and activity in those environments. It kind of makes sense.
It does, and an imaginative other world, and it does make sense.
Yeah. The next images we have are from the law office murals, and I'll let you talk about those, but I'd also like, since you mentioned the height of the rooms here, I'd love for you to talk about how sometimes when you're putting on an exhibit like this, you have to compromise your vision because of the space that you're working with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, those are 3 masonite panels that comprise 2 murals. 2 of the panels were joined together to make 1 mural, commissioned by Donald Young, a Salem attorney, for his new law office, built in 1950 on Court Street, just over here. The building was just torn down to make way for the YMCA building, the new YM that's going to go up. Donald Young and his wife Opal Young were staunch art supporters in Salem. They had a significant collection of art, and they were very much supporters of Clifford Gleason. Opal Young, Opal and Donald staged a one-person show of Gleason's work in their home in 1947, and in 1950 they commissioned him to do these murals, which are rather Chagall related, I think. Feature a lot of female figures. The Youngs wanted the murals to emphasize the role women have played in the history of the law.
It's a very modern idea for the time.
For 1950, yes. And Donald Young died in 1952 in a boating accident, and the firm became the Sherman firm, Ken Sherman. And Ken Sherman left that office. The firm left the office about the time the Halley-Ford Museum opened, which would be the late 90s. And he donated those panels, which were masonite and could be gotten off the wall, to the museum. This is the first time we've been able to show them. So in the law office, the mural that was comprised of two panels went up alongside a door and across the top of the door at the end of a hall. So you had the end of the hall, a door, one panel went up here, and the other one crossed over both the panel and the door to frame the door. So I always thought, when we do show these works in the museum, what we will do is we'll either find a door around here, or we'll install a door, just a blank door against the wall, and we will reinstall those just the way they were in the office. But this was a telephone company office building, and although in here we have plenty of room in this one space, in the other galleries there really isn't room to stack one panel on top of the other. So we have a photograph illustrating how they were in the law office.
So sometimes you don't get everything you want.
Not everything. We could have done it in this room, but this room is the room for the 1970s.
Right.
We can't have a 1950 mural in here,
No.
for heaven's sake.
This next piece really marks a transition point in Clifford's style.
Yes, so this is one of two examples in the show of Clifford's crinkled paper works, which he began doing in the late 1950s and on into the early 60s. And what he did with these was to take rice paper and dampen it and crinkle it up. So it was a very irregular, uneven surface, as you can see in the image. And then in gouache, which was a water-based paint, like watercolor, would paint on this roughened surface. And I think that there are other small pieces. They're, I suppose, in the scheme of things, rather minor pieces, but they're very significant in the development of Gleason as a painter, because they mark the transition from the kind of things we've just been looking at, still lifes, figures, murals with figures, kind of Fauvist scenes, abstract and modern, but traditional in a sense, to Clifford Gleason as a modern artist. So when we move from these crinkled paper pieces, that one, by the way, was the gift to the museum years and years ago by Eloise Ebert, who was the state librarian, a staunch Willamette supporter. She came to every conceivable event we had here. And when she, at the end of her life, donated several works, including this piece. So immediately in the wake of those, Gleason turns to oil paintings. Well, he's always painted in oil, back to oil paintings, which are very different from what we just were looking at. Now we're talking very heavy, rough textures, not unlike the rough textures in the crinkled paper watercolors. We're talking about much more abstract imagery. So in this next view, where you can still see the crinkled paper piece, and a black crinkled paper piece as well, called Firefly. But on the corner, around the corner on the wall, you begin to see paintings that are what I consider the legacy of the crinkled paper ones. They're bigger, they're oil, they're thickly layered with paint, they're extremely textured. When you look at them in the reel, they're just remarkably full of paint and full of the promise of paint, to get to the title of this show. So I see those paper pieces as really a bridge to the later Gleason, the Gleason that more of us know about or did before this show.
And much of the exhibit really features those more abstract oils.
Yes.
Throughout, and they're remarkable both as a whole, but also when you look up close at them. The texture of the paint and the lines, the spaces where the different colors go together are particularly stunning to me as a layperson, but...
So with a strange plant that's now coming up from 1961, you can really see that. That's one of the few views we have in our slides here. that comes in fairly close to a painting and to a degree shows you the built-up paintwork, the ridges of paint that he builds up. And when you see these works in the real, it's astonishing how sculptural, really, the paintings can become just because of the raised paint strokes. And he also digs back down through the layers, so you see underneath what might have happened earlier in the process.
Right. Now this piece actually has a signature on the front, and I noticed that that's very uncommon.
A few of them, the few that we have here are signed on the front, but you're right, it's very few.
And so does that mean that they're signed in the back? How do you authenticate a piece without a signature?
Well, they're almost all signed on the back. We're pretty sure we've got authentic Gleasons. What we're not quite so sure of is what the dates of some of them are, because I had a way of either not dating them or dating them in such a way that you can't read the last letter of the last number, for instance.
So you know the decade maybe, but not the year.
Is that 4? Is that 1? You know,
And then sometimes you even erase,
you erase.
paint over
Yeah.
different.
Maybe he thought he finished it, but he continued to work on it.
Right.
So
Exactly.
therefore the date changed
Yeah.
over time.
And I think sometimes some exhibitions only want work from the last 2 years. Well, one way to get around that might be
To change the date.
Yes.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
An artist has to make a living,
That's
right?
right.
The next image we have is of a large number of paintings that are in the gallery that is just over to my right. Do you want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what's going on in this room?
And that is a sweep of paintings, and in the actual exhibition, I think it's one of the more stunning views of the show. All work from the 60s, all work at first going rather directly out of those crinkled paper things, but then as the 60s proceed, the compositions get more open, less densely painted, and sort of more floating shapes, some of which you might be able to glimpse. We're not going to go into specifically any one of them in this review, but you can maybe see in the distance that some of them are quite open and more airy, as he said, as he proceeded. I don't think he ever saw an actual work by the German painter Julius Bissier, but he saw a reproduction of one in the art catalog for a show at the Seattle World's Fair of 1962, a little Bissier painting, which is very open and airy. And in this interview I was mentioning that OHS has, Gleason says he was very taken with that little black and white reproduction, and that it sort of shifted his way of composing and thinking about putting a painting together.
That's wonderful. The next view is of the gallery that we're in.
Yes. So, and that first view, we're upstairs looking down into this central part of the Melvin Henderson Rubio Gallery, the so-called atrium, because it's taller, much higher ceiling, because we took out part of the floor. And this whole room is devoted to the last 8 years of Gleason's life, the 70s. He died in 78. And it is a period when he really came on strong. Their works become bigger. They become, in some ways, more simplified compositionally. He tends more and more to work out toward the edges, lining things up around the edges. Often the centers are quite open and not empty exactly, but not occupied either with shapes which move out to the sides. So this sort of is the culminating room. This is why we couldn't have those murals from 1950 in here, because, I mean, after all, it would be a jolt.
Right, and going through the exhibit chronologically, I mean, one of the things that I appreciated as a person who was learning about Clifford Gleason was just how you moved through his work as you were seeing the pieces. So that was very helpful for the viewer, I think.
Well, the Hallie-Ford is, if nothing else, an educational institution. And so if I'm curating the show, I think in terms of, dear viewer, here is how
You should learn about this.
here's how this
A to B.
unfolded.
Yes, yes.
Other curators would do different things and should do different things.
The next image is still in the same gallery, but really highlights two walls, one that's directly in front of me now that has a set of 7 pieces that are absolutely stunning individually, but even more stunning as a collection of pieces. I'd love for you to talk about what they are, but also talk about the creative process in hanging a show and what role you played and what role the people who hang the show played.
The works that Shelby is referring to are drawings, although I'm making the point that they're drawings that are sort of in close company with paintings. Most of them are India ink drawings where the India ink is put on with a brush. So these are all from 1974. All are on very good paper. Some of them, most of them are India ink. They parallel in some ways the compositions of his paintings in that they reduce the elements to just a few elegant elements. Some of them make use of out on the edges, pulling the forms out to the edge. They're very free, they're very spontaneous, they're very sophisticated. They really show the hand of an artist who has worked by this time for 34, 6 years or whatever. Constantly drawing, constantly painting, knows the media, both media of drawing and painting so well that he can kind of combine them in a sense. A few of them are mixed media where he's used a stencil and added graphite into it. And one that we borrowed from the Jordan Schnitzer Museum at University of Oregon has some watercolor touches in it, but primarily they're India ink on paper. So I, broadly speaking, laid out the show. I provided a checklist in the order, the chronological order that I thought the show should follow, and it does do that. But the actual exact placement, spacing, and in some cases sequencing of the works shifted as I consulted with Silas Cook, who is the installer, the exhibition installer, and his business partner, his professional Fred. What's Fred's last name? Salzer. It was a joy to work with them. They aren't staff members. They are contracted to come in and install shows when that's needed. So in the case of this wall of the works on paper back here, I had noted I wanted all those together, but I didn't attempt in the abstract to figure out exactly where this one would go or even generally. I just thought that they'll go there. So that composition, which I think is really very effective, was Silas determining just how they would be placed.
And the fun of it was we were in the museum the day Silas was composing that on the floor. So we had all the drawings on the floor and we were up there. And we could look down and see him move things around and try this and try that. And it was very fun.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to think about all the ways that different people play a role in putting an exhibit like this on. And hanging the art may seem just like a logistical task, but actually it's very part of the creative process.
Yeah, it's very much a composition.
Yeah.
And, one thing that happened, a number of these paintings have evidence on the back that they've been shown in different ways, sometimes vertically, sometimes horizontally. And in two different cases, Silas made the judgment of hanging them a particular way. One of them is in the book, The Other Way. The way he aligned them, made perfect sense for the work and for the adjoining works. They are sort of in conversation with each other. But I think of all this is the 12th show like this that I've put together, a big retrospective with a monograph to go with it. I think of all of them, this is probably the most beautiful, just visually beautiful shows.
Well, it's nice that you feel so satisfied after all that work, that you're so pleased with that.
And one thing they said was that they, of course, vacated the museum when quarantine started. So for these two shows, it was their first time back in the museum. And they were very, very excited and happy to be here working. So it was great fun.
Yeah, a wonderful collaboration. We have a few more pieces, a few more images from this room to talk about, one of them directly behind you.
Yeah, that's called Blue Passage. That's from '73. All of the works on the wall that Blue Passage is on, this wall to our right here, are from 1972-73 and Gleason's so-called Art Advocates Project year. Art Advocates was a patron group in Portland, that each year would put up money to fund several artists to work full-time in their studios. So it provided a stipend, it provided living expenses, it provided the materials so that you could just spend all your time creating work. And Gleason had one of those grants for 72-73 that year. And these paintings here, and maybe others in the room, but these in particular are from that project. A wonderful year for one. He always lived close to the bone economically, financially. And this was the year when that was not the case, and he could really devote himself comfortably and fully to painting. So Blue Passage is one of those. Here's a case, I think, where an abstract work can be understood in terms of landscape or seascape or something like that. He loved the coast. He went there a lot. He talked about the coastline and so forth. And I'm probably inventing a few things, but looking at that work, can't you see that as sort of the coastline, the sea, the edge, the island forms out, the water. I think he thought in terms of that to a degree, not forcing it too much. Sometimes the works are very specifically titled to suggest a direct link. This is not particularly that.
It does evoke that, even just the different shades of blue, thinking about the different depths of water and how that changes the color of what you're looking at when you're looking at the sea.
So any typical seascape would be horizontal, of course, and this is intended, well, this also has history of being shown in different ways, but this, I think, is the correct way. There are actually published images of it in various catalogs, both ways. One will show it this way, another will show it this way. I think it goes this way. But let's just say it does go that way.
Right. You get to decide.
Yeah. The next one is Green Butterfly. That's also from this Art Advocates year. This is an example of which there are a number of this really extreme moving to the edge. So that a part of paintings that artists often avoid or ignore becomes the zone you look at. Of course, you look at it because you've got this pure white central core to kind of play off against. It's called Green Butterfly, and if we search through that painting, we do find one green component, and I guess that must be the butterfly.
Right. It's really stunning. It reminds me of the pieces of a Calder mobile.
Yes,
just
there is that spirit,
deconstructed and
there is that spirit in these late pieces, I think.
yeah.
And then the final two views, if we look at them, is outside the museum with the banner. We love the banners. And then a shot of the cover of the monograph, which is, it's not, I call them monographs, we call them monographs because they're not catalogs for the exhibition. They are books about the artist in the exhibition. They illustrate many of the works in the show. They illustrate many other works that aren't in the show. They provide a biographical context. A true catalog would list exactly what's in the show and give an essay about the artist, but it would be more one-to-one with the show than these publications are.
Well, I can vouch for it being a delightful read. I actually spent the weekend with it. And also, I like the fact that it is more than just what's in the show. It sort of adds to the experience of seeing what you see here when you're in the Halley Ford, but then you get to revisit some of those pieces and see others and see other images, which I found very satisfying. Well, thank you for walking us through it. And for those of you who are near us, we hope you will come and see this.
Yes, it runs through the end of October 31st. So it will have been up 2 months plus.
And the monograph can be purchased in the Halley Ford Library or bookstore. So let's shift our attention to Bonnie Hull, Memory as Myth, which is upstairs in the Halley Ford Museum. And I can't say enough what a pleasure it was to get to see this with you. I've never
Very fun.
I've never before walked through an exhibit with the artist who is actually on display.
It's fun.
And I love that we'll get the opportunity to tell people some of the stories behind your pieces that are not actually represented in the text on the walls and things. So the first image is showing the entrance to one of the galleries where your pieces are. And you want to just talk a little bit about how you decided on the title and what the theme of this exhibit means to you?
Memory is Myth came about as I was referencing a poem that I'd written in 2004 or 5, remembering various scenes from my childhood. And I became very, very interested in the notion of interpreting those scenes and taking them into another realm where they became not really my memories, but their own things. And in this case, actual paintings or works of art. And that became extremely interesting to me. These were all actually completed before the quarantine, but I think there's something of the spirit of being in one's own head that we now are all experiencing because of the quarantine. So as you first go up, these small paintings worked very well for this exhibit because that wall is a curved wall. Hence, a big painting is kind of a odd thing there. It doesn't quite work. So these were great. And these are all new paintings from this last spring, and reference some drawings that were made by my grandson, the soon-to-be illustrious, probably won't go to Willamette, but maybe, Sidney Hull, and who also carries a book with him and draws in it, and left that book for me when he left the country. So I kind of use that. And then we go into the exhibit straight in, and right ahead you can see a grid of drawings. These are the Corona drawings, but so we go in, and on either side are paintings, and these paintings reference some of my childhood memories, not too literally. The first is a wall that has 2 paintings on it, and the one on the left is called Pop's Floor. And this is references a memory of being a child and being placed on the floor of the sunroom and told to be very quiet. My brother and I sitting there reading National Geographic magazines and staring at the linoleum floor. And my grandfather's chair had metal feet on them and had made small indentations all over the floor. And in conversation with my brother, both he and I remember those little indentations in the floor, sitting there and running our fingers around them and so on. I kind of looked at a lot of linoleum. I had several directions, and there are several paintings under this painting because it kept getting painted over. And then the painting on the right is called Meadow, and that references my childhood time in Wisconsin, where we would go up to a Girl Scout camp, and we would open the camp. And in that camp, there was this huge meadow, and Wisconsin in the summer, hot, very hot. And there'd be a shadow line back where the trees were, and the bugs and the various creatures would rise up, kind of changing color as they hit the shadow line. And then I'm extremely interested in using a backdrop piece separate from the painting. So in the image that you're looking at on the screen, those are 2 separate things. The black with the white is a separate painted backdrop, and then the painting sits on top of it. So
it has a very different effect than a painted frame.
Yeah.
Because it gives you that dimension, that depth of that experience is much different.
And in the painting, the smaller painting, I used the wood grain of the panel that I was working on. And so in the backdrop, it's kind of an exploded wood grain. So it's kind of taking some of those elements and just doing a little something different with them. And then on the wall across from that wall are these three paintings. The top one is called Pool, and the bottom one is called The Long, Long Hall. And these two come from a memory of taking swimming lessons as a child and the big, scary, dark, creepy high school swimming pool, and going down this long hall with gigantic lockers and occasional scary high school kids. I was about 8 at the time. And then actually the pool itself. I did learn to swim, I will say that, so that's good. And then on the right is another painted backdrop. I'm very interested in pattern and in combining patterns, and I'm very interested in fabric. I have a fabric practice as well as a painting and studio practice. And so that pattern is from a piece of fabric that I have, and I think you can see that the painting on top of the backdrop is basically the same pattern as one in the backdrop, though that is a separate piece also.
Bonnie, before we move on from these images, there's a silhouette or a side view of a young girl in the painting, the pool painting. Will you tell me a little bit about who she is?
She is me, and last year, that would be 2019, I had a solo show at the Minthorn Gallery at George Fox University, and she just sort of, I don't know, she just showed up. And I've taken her on, and I began looking up on the internet, and I had a lot of brain images, and I became very interested in how the brain looks and the fact that really everyone's brain looks just about the same configuration, and there are certain, so I became very interested. So I painted that, and she shows up in many of my more recent works. I started this painting and I had the pool, and then at the very end, I put the Brain Girl on there. And then I came home from the studio and said to Roger, I just ruined that painting by putting the Brain Girl in there. Oh, well. But Roger, who was the curator of my show as well, said he felt it was okay. So on we went.
So the next image is of 16 works from your Corona series.
Well, I was in the middle of a residency when quarantine occurred. I was at the Annex at the Salem Art Association, and I had the drawing that's on the top left on the drawing board, and it's called Oh, This Life We Live. And in this drawing, everything begins to happen. The virus itself is in the upper right, and persons dying and people running away and flowers blooming and coffee, of course. There always has to be a coffee cup somewhere. Last drawing I did there on the 13th of March, I came home. And there, like everybody, there we were, and we couldn't go anywhere. And we took that fairly literally, Roger and I. We really did not go anywhere. I didn't even go to my studio, which is about a 5-minute drive from our house. I sat up in the dining room, and since it would be clear that we would not be featuring any large dinner parties in the foreseeable future, I took over our very long dining room table, and that has been my studio all through this. And I started making these drawings. Well, these are 16, and I now have 71 of these drawings. So, and what I basically was doing here was just simply free associating, just sitting down on a given day and drawing the things I was thinking about And remarkably, of course, not remarkably, the things I was thinking about are the things you were thinking about and things you were thinking about. Being alone, being scared, being all manner of random things. So some of them, I drew quite a lot with 3 friends, and we had the habit of going to coffee, and we would all bring our drawing books and we would draw each other. So of course we couldn't do that, and I texted them all and said, could you please send me a selfie? And they all did. So that was my imagined conversation number 1, and I have a couple of more. It is very funny to me, very interesting to me how people choose to present themselves. Lucy, very straightforward. Nancy, kind of a glamour shot. Quite good. So I not only draw in these books, but I write. And sometimes I simply write what people say, as I have been today, just writing what you were saying or Roger was saying. But sometimes I write more than that. And on this particular day, I've always been very fascinated, and I have a number of drawings of the pattern that rain makes on a windshield. And there's a windshield wiper, and it throws all the drops upward. So this particular bit of writing is about that. And the next one is about our son and his family were in St. Croix, and my daughter-in-law was homeschooling our grandson, Sydney, who was actually not totally interested in homeschooling. He didn't like the format. He didn't want to sit and look at the screen. And then she also has a 2-year-old who wanted to do everything that her older brother was doing. So the drawing here represents the kind of need to regiment, get the children organized, get everything going. And then the drawing, the black lines are taken from one of Sydney's drawings and sort of represent the way children are. They're just all over the place. So the next one is called Brain Girl. Number 36, not the best day, not the worst day, wore a mask. And that is a selfie because, of course, it's always true that we have ourselves to look at, but much more true in this time. And I have a lot of selfies. And then the next one is one that is called 16,600 marks, representing a fraction of the over 100,000 lost. And at the time that I made this drawing, this was in May, at the end of May, there had been just 100,000 people had died from the virus. And I was trying to visualize what does 100,000 look like, which is hard to visualize, I think. So I gridded my paper, and I gridded a small piece of paper, and then I made marks, and I counted every single mark that I made on this paper, and that is the red ones and the black ones. And then when I would fill a square, I would then write the total number of marks on my cheat sheet so that at the end I could actually add them all up. And I have now done a second drawing, and I think I wound up getting about 20,000 marks on that one. And now that we've reached over 200,000, I guess I'll have to do another one. This work, number 55, is a reference to Pop. Pop was my grandfather. And I did a whole series around this time. By this time, we're in June 7th, where I switched from doing line drawings with a pen, and I started doing gouaches, gouache being opaque watercolor, a medium I like a lot. And so there are a number, and there are about 4 or 5 in the exhibit. And then number 62, I collect brown and white Staffordshire china, and I had a lot of plates out of the china cabinet. And remember, I'm in the dining room. So the china cabinet is right there. So I had all these plates out. I was thinking of maybe drawing some of the patterns from the plates. But I had them all flipped over. And I noticed how beautiful their marks are. And as I was looking at the marks, I thought, wow, these would make great tattoos. And so I just put my arm down and drew around my arm. And then I put the tattoos on there. And somebody has sent me an email saying they seriously are considering having a tattoo from a China mark on the back of a plate they own, which I hope they do, and that they send me a picture.
Well, and for people who don't know, what these marks represent is the company that made the china. That was sort of their stylized brand impression on the back of different pieces of china.
And there are two marks in the series of marks that appear on this arm. One is just below the bracelets, and one is up just below the intersection of the pinky finger. And those are the marks that on some plates identify actually the day and the year and the month that the item was made. And there are charts that you can go and look up and see. And when I first started collecting, I got the chart and I madly went around and wrote the date every plate was made and put it on a sticky note on the back of the plates. But that was counterproductive if you actually wanted to use the plate.
That's right.
Because then when you washed it, well, you know.
So this next image is in our print gallery, which is on the second floor of the Hallie Ford as well, and shows a series of pieces that you've done in various media. Will you talk a little bit about these?
I had quite a conversation with the curator at the conception of the show.
Roger.
That would be Roger Hall. As to what were we going to actually do? And as he referenced earlier, his particular preference is historic. So, and he likes to, start at the beginning and carry it around. But I was a little bit more anxious to show current work. So it broke down nicely to have current work in the study gallery and then more of a retrospective in the print study room. There's quite a variety of work in there, starting with some early drawings, not super early, but 1979, so quite a while ago. And then moving around to paintings, and the one that are in the paintings that are referenced in this first image are mostly from the 90s.
And we can see Brain Girl in the piece that has 3 panels to it in the left panel.
Yes, Brain Girl. And that threesome is actually from the summer of 2019. And that threesome was painted in response to discovering that my heritage is Swedish. My mother's maiden name was Stone, but in fact, in reality, it was Stenberg. And my brother was in Sweden and texting me little blurbs about what he was doing. So I began researching Swedish petroglyphs, and is what that series is about. And of course, there's Brain Girl thinking it over. And she is saying ogräs, which means weeds in Swedish. My friend Carolyn, who's a painter from California, was in the studio painting at the same time, and we were kind of in the weeds. She has a series of paintings, not unlike those. And this is the other wall across the way. And the gallery, the print study room, is all work on paper. And paper has been my mode until about the last 5 years, when I've done more on panels and canvas. But these works that you're seeing here are all work on paper. I did a series of gouaches, big ones, and those were kind of based on some panorama photos that I had taken. Roger Hull is, over the past decade at least, has been constantly researching and writing. And I go along as kind of the girl Friday, the helper person who does a little thises and that's and moral support and keeps track of things. And so, which can be dull, but not if you're using it as a source of your art. So I'm constantly drawing whatever he's doing. And there are many works in here that reference projects that Roger was involved in at the time. And one here with Hank Pander when Roger curated a show of Hank's work, and one he curated a show of Harry Woodman's. So on the upper level are works in wax that I did quite a few of for several years, wax on paper.
And this last image is of the cases, the display cases, and there's actually 2 in the gallery. This is one of them. And you have a selection of your journals that are open for the viewer to see. I love this style of display. Whenever I go to museums, I always find this kind of collage and 3-dimensional nature. And I also love that it's showing more your day-to-day experience as an artist and how you process the world. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you have in these journals?
Someone asked me, Roger and I were in the museum last Saturday greeting members, and it was very, very fun to actually, because mostly if you have feedback, it's feedback that you get after the fact. Someone's been to see the exhibit and they write you a nice note, and that is so appreciated by me. But the fun of that day was actually being there while people were looking and having them give you feedback and ask questions and talk to you while you were standing there. And one person said, "Oh, this is so great. So are you turning the page every day?" And it's very, very hard to get these big pieces of glass off. It involves a big magnetic suction cup. And I was picturing telling Jonathan Bucci, the collections curator, that I would like to remove the glass each day and turn the pages. But in reality, if it were possible, I could do that. I could keep turning the pages and it would be a different exhibition every day. So I have about 45 volumes of journals now. Now let's have that in perspective. Picasso had 150, but then I'm not Picasso, so never mind. And I take them with me everywhere. I draw my friends, I draw my food, I draw in the doctor's office, I draw committee meetings, well, when there used to be. I draw Zoom meetings. I believe I have a drawing of you, Shelby, at a Zoom. A rather nice drawing.
I love that. You have a journal that's in one of the cases that is all images of coffee.
Yes, and that, it took me a number of years. I'll have to go back and look, but I think it took me about 10 years because it's only coffee. So I would keep that journal by the door. And when I was going out for coffee, I'd grab it. I didn't carry it with me all the time, like I do with these other journals. But and eventually, and so when you look through it, from my point of view, it's quite fun because there's coffee in Cortana, and there's coffee in Firenze, there's coffee in Archive Coffee in downtown Salem, and then of course in this particular image, the ones closest to the viewer at the bottom of this image are of Roger. I probably have 200 drawings of Roger. I have taken up this particular format called the driving head, where he's in the car and I'm driving. And he's a very good person to draw for me because he doesn't mind if I draw him. Some people get nervous and they don't like it. He doesn't care. So I draw him, and then I write down what he's talking about. And that usually is flowing around him. And when it came to this, I could actually have filled an entire case with Roger drawings. But, you know.
I urged her to.
Did you?
He wanted that, but I thought I'd be a little more conservative. So it is true for me that an awful lot of my ideas come out of these books. So I take the books, I look through them, and it doesn't matter really how old. Like sometimes I'll go back and look at a journal and I'll think, great idea. Sometimes there'll be a phrase or something that brings an image to mind. So they aren't for me just things I complete and throw on the shelf. I do look at them, and you can't quite see, but in the middle section of that particular case is one of the Corona drawings where I just referenced things that were said. And I think it's even called keeping track of what's been said. So things people said over the course of quarantine, all fairly familiar comments.
So there's a conversation both between the journals over time,
Yes.
and then also between the journals and the pieces of work
Yes.
that you create outside of the journals, which is really neat.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're a way for you to process what's going on in your world right now, but then also you get to go back to that and pull out of that ideas and inspiration for the things that you're creating.
A couple of the people that were here last weekend, I was pointing out a very good diet technique to one of the people, which was I had 30 pistachios and I drew, it was the whole idea of this was I needed to draw every pistachio before I ate it. And that particular day, Roger was off researching at Portland State, and I was in the car drawing the pistachios. And in fact, it took me 45 minutes to eat 30 pistachios, so I think it's a good diet technique.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Roger, what is the difference between curating an exhibit of an artist like Clifford Gleason, who cannot tell you what he thinks about how you curate his show, and an artist like Bonnie, who might have her own opinions?
Yes. Well, I've curated shows of both deceased and living artists, and it is a different dynamic. It is even more of a dynamic when, of course, the artist in question is your spouse.
Yes, I would imagine.
So I'm listed as the curator, and I am the curator of her show, but it was very much a collaborative thing. I hope you see it that way.
Oh, yes, I totally do.
Especially with the big decisions had to be made with the study gallery, because that was attempting to select works from a broad span of time that would represent the sort of thing the range of things she had done, and be good, strong works individually and so forth, and ones that we could get a hold of. I mean, some are in rather distant collections, and we pretty much worked with what we had. One work is from Candace Hess's collection. One is a piece from the museum collection. There's a piece in the Gleason show of Bonnie's that's from the Salem Public Library collection. But mainly we worked with what was on hand.
I kind of wished, I don't know if I've said this to you exactly, I kind of wished he'd curated me a little more, a little, he'd been a little bit.
Bossier?
Yeah. As it was, he was just like, what would you like? And then he made suggestions. Well, maybe this one instead of that one. But I would have liked it if he would have just said it's going to be this, this, and this. And then I would have given my feedback. It worked out okay, though.
So you've been curated both by your spouse and people who are not your spouse.
Yes.
Do you have a preference?
No, I think it's extremely interesting and I bet every living artist would say this, it's extremely interesting to see how somebody else organizes your work. And it's extremely interesting to know what they consider to be a strong piece, which often isn't what you consider to be a strong piece, sometimes though. And I find that all quite fascinating. So this has been a fantastic opportunity for me to have the show at the Hallie-Ford, and I appreciate it so much. And mine comes down October 17th. So
Come see it soon.
yeah, come see it. Hurry.
So, as we're bringing our conversation to a close, Roger, since you curated both of these exhibits and they're here at the same time, any thoughts on the way they relate to each other as from the perspective of the pieces of art?
Let me start by suggesting perspectives on the two artists themselves. There are certain parallels, one of them being their involvement with Salem over many years, their involvement in the Salem art community. Clifford was very active in the early days of the Salem Art Association taking over Bush House. This was before Bush Barn, but taking over Bush House. He helped to organize exhibitions there. He had his own gallery downtown briefly. He painted the murals we talked about. He helped found the Salem Art Fair. He's very much a person involved in Salem art matters, and Bonnie certainly has been that as well. Very involved with the Salem Art Association, with Project Space that went on downtown. That was more or less her idea, I think, originally. She's involved with artist groups, such as the women who were in that one Corona series drawing. She's been on Bush House committees and boards and this and that. So both Salem artists and Salem art community participants in different ways, of course, but parallel. As to their art, they both have in common the love of drawing. One thing we talked a bit about the later ink drawings here, but one thing we didn't really talk about is Clifford Gleason as a draftsman. He drew all the time. He had drawing books with him always. He drew and he drew and he drew as a way of sort of keeping his hand in, and I think that's why Bonnie does it, among other reasons, generating ideas, images that sometimes evolve into paintings. So that is a parallel, I think. Lastly, there is actually a Bonnie Hull in the Gleason show, and it's a piece over there. Gleason's his last works were Sita project paintings, contemporary, I never can remember what Sita stands for, but anyway, it was kind of a latter-day WPA support system for all manner of people needing retraining or just support financially. And he had a Sita grant in both Salem and in Portland, because by the end of his life he was associated with both cities. His Sita grant project for Salem was a very large painting that was in the public library for years. Bonnie worked at the library. She knew the painting. She loved the painting. It got damaged one day by a book cart being pushed into it, a little tear that could have been easily fixed. It was put in storage, and from storage it was thrown away. So it was really his biggest, major, last painting that should be dominating one of the walls in this gallery.
5 feet by 8 feet.
8 feet wide. Now that's big for Gleason. I mean, none of these get that big. So Bonnie looked for it and others looked for it, tried to contact the various keepers of the storage bins of Salem and so forth and so on, but no. So quite some years ago, she painted this work that's over here, an homage to Clifford Gleason and to that painting. It doesn't duplicate the painting, but it's in the spirit of it. And so there is an actual sort of aesthetic tie between Bonnie and Clifford to that extent, anyway.
Well, as you know, I've warned you both that I have, to wrap up our interviews, I have a list of a lightning round series of questions. So not designed for deep thought or exposition, just the first idea that comes to mind, and this is in the spirit of James Lipton and his Inside the Actors Studio interview questions. This is my version of that for the two of you. So I think just to make it easy for us, we'll start with Roger. I'll ask you both the same question, and you can answer first, and then we'll go to Bonnie and just go back and forth.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Okay.
So, Roger, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word is situation.
And Bonnie, what is your favorite word?
Bedtime.
Roger, your least favorite word?
Oh. Well, it's not a word, and hence it's my least favorite, irregardless.
And that's why it's your least favorite. Bonnie, how about you?
I don't think I could say it on camera.
Fair enough. Wait, this is an educational program after all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Roger, the favorite museum that you've ever been to?
I would say the Uffizi
Which is in Florence,
is in Florence.
Italy.
Yes.
And you took probably hundreds of alumni there over the years,
Well, maybe not hundreds, but certainly dozens.
but a
Yeah.
lot.
Yes.
Bonnie, how about you?
The Art Institute of Chicago, which was the first museum I ever went to as a child from the Chicago area. Yeah.
That's great. And Roger, the museum you'd most like to see that you have never been to?
I would love to go to the new version of the Whitney Museum of American Art, the one on High Line.
I can highly recommend it. It's fantastic. How about you, Bonnie?
We have not been to New York in quite a long time, so I would like to go to the new MoMA, which I haven't seen.
Okay, you're throwing a dinner party. Who are the artists, living or dead, that you would want to have come to your dinner party?
Oh, well, I would probably go regional. So I would have George Johansson, Hank Pander, not Clifford Gleason, he couldn't come. And Lucinda Parker, yeah, okay.
Lovely.
Lucinda would round it out beautifully. And Bonnie, of course, because she'd be hosting.
She'd be hosting.
Yes.
Bonnie, how about you? Doesn't have to be the same dinner party.
No, I would like to invite Cy Twombly and Lee Krasner and just talk about painting.
That's wonderful. So if you could go back in time, when and where would you go?
I would probably, despite all the hardships and issues, like to go back to the 30s and be able somehow or other, through circumstance, to be able to follow the art scene of the moment and watch those federal art programs unfold and so forth. I'm very excited about this upcoming show here at the WPA in the Northwest show that will be coming up in later months.
How about you, Bonnie? Where and when would you go?
I think I would like to go back to England during the arts and crafts, the beginning of the arts and crafts movement. So much was done with pattern, and it was so important graphically and in every way that the sort of emphasis on Japanese design and all that coming in, that would be very intriguing, I think.
So if you could not have been an art historian, Roger, what would you have done?
I would have been a journalist. That's what I thought I was going to be. And I believe my art historical writing is journalistic.
Yes. That makes sense to me. How about you, Bonnie? If you could not have been an artist, what would you have been?
I think I might have been a puppeteer.
Really? That's fantastic. So what is your favorite place on Willamette's campus?
Well, at this point, I would have to say the Halliford Museum of Art.
Fair enough. Not all that surprising. Bonnie, how about you? What's
I
your
would say
favorite
the
place?
same. The Halliford, for sure.
Roger, what's your favorite place anywhere?
Probably Salem, to be honest. But if not Salem, Florence, just because I've been there so often.
It's a good alternative. Bonnie, how about you?
I'm kind of partial to 6513 Southwest Ebb Street in Lincoln City, because your mind kind of roams free when you're at the beach, and that's been good for me.
That's great. Roger, what is your favorite thing to lecture or teach about when you're teaching?
Well, there are two options, but let's say 20th century European modernism, especially the early years, Fauvism, Cubism, Dada. surrealism.
And Bonnie, your favorite subject or object to draw or paint?
I like pattern and gesture.
Well, that wraps up our conversation. This has been so delightful.
Thank you, Shelby.
for spending all
What
this time
fun.
with me and for giving our alumni and parents and friends and museum members an opportunity to experience this exhibit in a fashion, in I suppose COVID fashion, for those
COVID.
who couldn't make it here for various reasons. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being such a part of the Willamette family. We're really grateful for both of you.